The European Commission President says this is Europe's moment as she calls on member states to back a €750 billion coronavirus recovery fund. MPs in France get set to vote on endorsing a tracing app designed to contain the spread of COVID-19. If approved, the technology will be made available on a voluntary basis from next week. And Donald Trump threatens social media companies with new regulations or even closures. This after Twitter added a warning phrase to two of his tweets. It's good to have you with us here on France 24. First, the European Commission President has proposed a €750 billion recovery fund. The money would help countries within the bloc weather the financial turmoil caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Ursula von der Leyen said this was Europe's moment as she called on skeptical member states to jump on board.
The crisis has huge externalities and spillovers across all countries. And none of that can be fixed by any single country alone. A bankrupt company in one member state is a reliable supplier gone for business in another. A struggling economy in one part of Europe weakens a strong economy in another part. This is about all of us, and it is way bigger than any of us. This is Europe's moment.
Earlier, I spoke to our correspondent Dave Keating in Brussels and asked him why the proposal was facing resistance.
It's because of this question of debt mutualization. We've got the so-called Frugal Four, Austria, Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands, vociferously against this. And that's because it involves the Commission borrowing the money for this fund on the international markets and using the credit of all EU 27 countries to guarantee that debt. Now, this is something that had been suggested 10 years ago during the debt crisis. Germany adamantly opposed it. It never happened. Now, actually, Germany is proposing this along with France, but it's those four smaller Northern European countries that don't like it. Indeed, I was hearing from a Dutch diplomat a little earlier saying that this 750 billion figure is an absolute non-starter. They could never accept it. I suppose that the Commission knows this. This is probably an opening gambit for a negotiation to follow in which the Frugal Four will fight their corner and maybe it gets dragged down to 500 billion, something they probably wouldn't have been happy with to start with. But this negotiation, this high figure, puts the stakes a little bit more in Southern Europe's favor.
For more on this story, we can speak to Remy Bourgeot, economist and an associate fellow at the French Institute for Strategic and International and Strategic Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Now, €750 billion is a lot of money. Will it be enough to cushion the economic harm done by, these coronavirus lockdowns?
Well, it's a very substantial amount, and especially it would be really very impressive to address a kind of normal recession, if you will. But that's true that in facing such a devastating depression and with no recovery in sight, this is not that substantial. Of course, there are clear political limits to what can be done. The fact that France and Germany were already able to agree on something of that scale is very significant, but we're really witnessing an economic crisis which is really of a different magnitude. And although this is really a strong political signal, and after all the chaos at the beginning of the pandemic in Europe, this is showing some kind of cohesion. But it's clearly not going to change really the course of the depression we're facing. It's really important in terms of political signal, and it's going to have an economic impact if it's used really for targeted measures. And what's really striking here and significant is that it's going to benefit those countries which have been most hit hardest. Much more than other countries. The grants that are going to be spent will not depend on the countries contribution to the EU budget. So that's really important.
I want to jump in.
I'm
sorry, I just want to jump in there because you made an important point. You said it won't change the course of the depression. Why is that? Is it because it's going to take too long for the money to get into people's hands?
Well, that's one part really of the problem. And also, really, if you look at the course of this recession, I mean, we're talking for this year of a recession along the lines of 8% of contraction, but even the ECB acknowledges that could get much worse than 10, 12%, or even more than that. So this plan really amounts to several percentage points of the EU's GDP. That's a lot of money indeed, especially if you take into account this 500 billion euros in direct grants. But facing such a devastating crisis, that's not going to be enough. But that's important also because those countries which are hardest hit are also the same as the ones that were hardest hit by Euro crisis, that have a bad fiscal position, and they don't feel allowed in this crisis to spend as much in stimulus as those countries which are less hit by the crisis.
Exactly, because they were just starting to see a recovery. I want to ask you about the Frugal Four now, because as you heard from our correspondent Dave Keating in Brussels before, he spoke to one Dutch MEP who said 750 billion euros was an absolute non-starter. How should they go about convincing the Frugal Four that this is actually a good plan that's beneficial for everyone in the EU?
Well, I think there's clearly a negotiation already going on, as this statement really indicates. I don't believe they would block any such deal entirely. The sum could be reduced somehow, but it's clear also that the Commission has tried to go even further than what the French and German governments had indicated in recent weeks. So clearly we're in the middle of a tough negotiation, and it's really clear that all the larger countries in Europe are in favor of this plan, especially, of course, those countries that are hardest hit by the crisis and are going to be recipients of those funds, but also decisively Germany this time, after all these accusations that the country showed no compassion at the beginning of the crisis. So really, the balance is in favor of something significant like this plan. There will be a tough negotiation, but I don't believe that those four countries could block this program entirely.
We'll see what happens, Rémi Bourgeot. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Now, lawmakers here in France are set to vote on whether to endorse a tracing app designed to contain the spread of the coronavirus. If approved, the Stop COVID app will be made available on a voluntary basis starting from next week. France's privacy watchdog has backed the technology, saying it does respect the concept of data protection. Kathy Clifford reports.
Should the Stop COVID app be officially adopted by French authorities? That's the question French MPs and senators are debating this Wednesday. Under fire from critics, the French Digital Affairs Minister recognised the application's potential flaws, but sought to reassure the French people.
Je ne vais pas vous mentir, je ne peux jamais garantir qu'il y ait zéro risque. Par contre, ce que je peux vous garantir, c'est qu'on a pris toutes les mesures possibles. Et ce que je peux aussi vous garantir, c'est que je pense que c'est le fichier de santé le plus sécurisé de la République française.
Over recent weeks, this digital tool has been strongly criticised across the political spectrum, from the far-left Unbowed France party to the socialists, the conservative Les Républicains, and the far-right National Rally Party. Many MPs have spoken out against potential privacy breaches, as well as human rights and freedom infringements.
Nous sommes opposés par principe, et nous l'avons toujours été, à tout ce qui remet gravement en cause les libertés individuelles. Et ça en fait évidemment partie. Ce tracking, il consiste finalement à collecter des données personnelles extrêmement sensibles des citoyens.
Moi, j'ai des doutes sur le fait que cette application-là soit prête aujourd'hui. J'ai de réels doutes sur ça et sur son efficacité en tant que telle.
Vous savez, je connais le coup, on commence par une mesure exceptionnelle, puis après c'est tout le temps. Je ne veux pas d'un monde où nous serions contrôlés, nos libertés individuelles surveillées comme ça.
According to some opponents, it's too late to bring the app into force, as the epidemic seems to be coming down in France. But if the Parliament votes in favour of the app, it could be brought in from this weekend.
Next, the British Prime Minister is sitting before Commons Liaison Committee. Boris Johnson being grilled by members of Parliament over the biggest scandal to rock his prime ministership. This over his refusal to fire his top aide after reports Dominic Cummings flouted lockdown rules and drove across England while showing symptoms of COVID-19. Numerous polls show Boris Johnson's popularity plunging within a matter of days. Now, police in Hong Kong arrested 300 people after thousands took to the streets to protest national security legislation proposed by China. Riot police fired pepper pellets to disperse crowds, while protesters called for the special administrative region to be liberated. The United States, meanwhile, is mulling sanctions on Beijing if the legislation does get approved. The US president has accused Twitter of election meddling, this after the platform added a warning phrase to 2 of his tweets. The president threatened social media companies with new regulation or even closures, accusing them of silencing conservative voices. Fraser Jackson reports.
Donald Trump, President of the United States and Twitter's most prominent user. The statesman has long used the social media platform to gin up support and denounce his critics. But now the site has slapped 2 of his tweets with the warning, saying they could contain misleading information. The president's tweets about postal vote fraud in California have led to the social media giants adding this link underneath the message. When clicked, it takes the user through to a Twitter Moments page, which breaks down the tweet and provides verified information about mail-in ballots. On May 11th, Twitter changed its policies regarding false and misleading information. They say their goal is to make it easy to find credible information on Twitter and to limit the spread of potentially harmful and misleading content. The move against Trump's tweet prompted him to accuse Twitter of interfering in the 2020 presidential election and stifling free speech.
When you do all mail-in voting ballots, you're asking for fraud.
Postal votes have become his latest obsession as he begins to focus on November's general election. With the threat of COVID-19, several states such as Nevada, Michigan and California have moved to send all registered voters postal vote applications, but that has been met with fire by Republicans. Last week, Trump threatened to withhold federal funds from Nevada and Michigan, and Republicans have filed a lawsuit against California, claiming the governor has exceeded his power. Republicans claim more mail-in ballots means more voter fraud, something experts say is false. Democrats say Republicans are worried that a rise in postal votes would work in the Democrats' favor, and that was echoed by the president himself. In a March 30th interview with Fox and Friends, Trump said a significant increase in vote by mail would block a Republican from ever being elected again.
Now, small museums and castles have begun to reopen here in France, but many tourist hotspots remain closed. The Palace of Versailles has been sitting empty for over 2 months now. Alison Sargent takes us on a tour of the palace like few have ever seen.
It's a rare portrait of a sleeping castle. Versailles is not a place that's used to being empty. The palace usually welcomes some 10 million visitors a year. But for the past several months, its curators and custodians have been the only ones walking its halls.
C'est une impression assez étrange parce qu'on est dans un lieu qui est grandiose et qui du coup devient assez mélancolique. Et on a hâte que les visiteurs puissent revenir dans nos murs.
In Versailles' famed Hall of Mirrors, all of the sculptures have been moved toward the center. The castle's custodians have been doing all of the things they usually never have time for, like polishing the hall's 357 mirrors and giving its intricate moldings a deep dusting. In the Royal Chapel, a solitary concert performed by the palace's chief curator. Daily upkeep for the organ that belonged to Louis XIV.
J'essaie de venir tous les jours, oui, pour qu'il puisse fonctionner. Puis ça permet aussi de vérifier l'accord qui a très bien tenu pendant toute cette période.
In addition to being a volunteer organist, the curator is also the man who checks up on the garden's 320 sculptures.
En cas de réouverture, nous sommes prêts. Les sculptures sont déhoussées. Dès que les jardins sont ouverts, bien le public pourra de nouveau contempler ces chefs-d'œuvre.
It's not yet clear when visitors will be allowed back on the grounds. Until then, the vast gardens of France's Sun King sit silent and empty, with no company but the sun itself.
That's it for me. Thank you very much for watching.